guys, it's Lexi and welcome back to my channel. I am gonna have to say that I think the #1 genre of books I've read is fantasy, still to this date, even though I've been gobbling up thrillers. So I decided what better way to commemorate my love of this genre than to do a whole video talking about every one I've ever read. I feel like it goes without saying this has to do within the past few years that I've become a pretty avid reader. And then my second thing is I'm trying to rearrange my office. My window's right here and I'm thinking of getting another bookshelf. If y'all have any ideas how to arrange this, let me know. My husband's office area is on the other side. Anyways, I figure I'll just give you a quick little recap of every book that I've read and tell you whether or not I think you should read them. I'm gonna count series that are still being released because it's not my fault all the books haven't come out yet. So to get started, I'm actually gonna do the book that I finished last night. This is a new release. It comes out in March, I believe. This is Exquisite Ruin by Adrienne May. I would describe this as, if you've seen the movie Labyrinth, David Bowie. It's kind of what it's giving, except instead of a Goblin King, it's like a, they call it a daemon. It's like a centaur. No, that's not the right word. Not a cyclops. I'll put a picture of that guy from Percy Jackson. It's like a monstrous thing, and you start the book with amnesia. You're in the perspective of the main character, the girl. Don't remember what's going on, and you just know you're stuck in this maze with this guy who has hooves and a tail and horns on his head. It is a very spicy book at certain points. It is kind of slow moving at first. Once you get to the end, I would say your jaw will probably dislocate. I am very excited for the next one. For Divine Descent that's going to be released, it says she's already working on writing it. So I actually need to chill out. This hasn't even been released to the masses yet, and I'm already fiending for the next one. So yeah, I would recommend reading this one if you're okay with a little heat and some weird creature-esque monster love story situation going on. The next one is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reed. She is working on writing the next one, or it's already been written, and it's going to be released in August of this year. I don't have the pretty one with like the splayed edges, so, but that's okay. This is not your typical fantasy read. It doesn't seem like it at first, but towards the end you'll see why I would kind of describe it as one. This girl who sees things and she goes to this mansion to help redesign it, but she's still seeing things, like magical things, not scary things. Oh, my cat came in. I didn't even realize that. She can't tell what's real and what's part of her imagination, and then everything kind of gets answered towards the end. I think it's really beautifully written. I know some people did not eat this up like I did. To each their own. There is a romance in it. It's not that spicy, which is fine. I wouldn't really call this a romantasy. This is definitely more on the fantasy spectrum. There are some pretty heavy topics in this that Ava Reed discusses in a pretty respectful manner. Anyways, I would recommend reading this if you want a more slower paced fantasy that's really simple to read and digest. For some reason, these books are super heavy and I don't feel like grabbing all of them. I should for the purposes of this video, but I'm not gonna. This is From Blood and Ash by Jennifer Armentrout. I have 4 of them. I think another one was released. I don't know. I know this is one of the books that came out. The main character is like asleep and you're in the perspective of the guy. I don't love those kinds of books where it switches the perspective and it just retells what happens, sort of. I've already done a video kind of talking about this book, so I'm not gonna go too heavy in it. She's this innocent, virtuous maiden who doesn't have anything going on. She's very sheltered, and she experiences a lot: war, fighting, love, power. I don't want to spoil much, but let me say, Miss Girl, I mean, this book has been out for a while, so spoiler, plug your ears if you want to read this, skip like the next 20 seconds. She becomes probably the most powerful female character I've ever read in any fantasy series. That's all I'll say about that spoiler. I think this is one of the better written fantasy books, especially when it comes to world building, and it's such an important thing when it comes to those kinds of book collections, because if you don't really understand what's going on, you're not going to be rooting for the character as much, and I think Jennifer does a great job of that in this. If you want a more spicy, slow burn, slightly violent book series, I would definitely recommend this one. And that's all I'll say about this because I don't have too much to say because it's not super fresh on the brain, but I remember I loved her. The next one is Realm Breaker and Blade Breaker. I have the other one. I was using it as a prop earlier by Victoria Aveyard. I tried to read these multiple times and for some reason I just couldn't get into it, and I think now I can maybe. There was so much going on in the first few chapters, so many names and characters being dropped, I wasn't remembering them. I wish there was a sort of list at the beginning that I could go back to because I just wasn't picking up anything. So I love her Red Queen series, which I'll get to, but this one for me was a no. but I'm gonna give it another chance again. I think third time's a charm. After that, then I'm just gonna give up, unfortunately. Maybe I just need to be in the right mindset to start this. I don't have a whole lot to say about these. Because I love her so much, I'm gonna give her another try. After I finished From Blood and Ash, I was absolutely enthralled with Jennifer Armentrout, so I picked up another series, Storm and Fury by her, and I read all of it, yes. However, I did not like this. I kind of hated it. I read it because I needed to know what happened and I was invested in finding out the ending, but there were just so many scenes in here that I would definitely define as cringy. There were so many similes that made no sense. Like she would say, there's one line that I remember, I'm not gonna word this exactly right, where she said like, holy cracker the size of Texas, or she was saying some really cringy lines that for one don't fit well in a fantasy, even though it's a more modern fantasy. I just wasn't loving. And then this is a sort of gargoyle from under earth fighting battle situation going on. There's like a harbinger of evil and all things not good. See, I don't even remember what happens because the only things I remember about these is just the very uncomfortable lines being spoken. I don't think it was written the greatest. I think From Blood and Ash absolutely trumps this times a million. So I don't think I would necessarily recommend these unless you're wanting something you can kind of laugh at while you're reading. And yes, I did finish these. These were easier to digest than the Victoria one was. That's why I think I finished these. If these weren't easy to understand, I would not have completed. I'm on my second shelf from the bottom. I feel like this counts even though she's been in every video. The Six of Crows, Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. This was talked about in my spooky book recently, my spooky book video, and I think I gave more than enough details on this, so I'm not gonna go too heavy on it. This is a spin-off from the Shadow and Bone, and you think I'd start with that one first, but I love this one so much more than Shadow and Bone, and you could start with this. You don't need to read the Shadow and Bone trilogy to understand this. You could do this one first, and if you had to pick one or the other, do them. You root for the characters so much along the way. There's not really any romance. This is very strong fantasy. This is, I think, my favorite book by Leigh I've ever read, my favorite book collection. And I'm not gonna spend too much longer on this because I talked about them for 5 minutes recently. I definitely recommend. As you can tell, I started editing and then I realized I forgot to mention Assistant and Apprentice to the Villain. I will put a picture of it somewhere on here. I forgot it because I read it on my Kindle, but I love that book collection so much. I can't believe it completely passed my mind. It is hilarious. It is the epitome of like a rom-com and a romantasy had a baby. Don't forget about it. Just because it didn't have its own special segment in this video because my brain forgot about it. Don't do the same. Give it the love and attention it deserves because it's hilarious. Okay, that's all. Back to editing. Just wanted to put that out there. Might as well, while I'm on that note, go to Shadow and Bone. It is a Netflix series, however, the TV show has characters from this and the duology I just said, and it's not exactly accurate to the book because those characters don't really mix with these in the book series, but they do in the TV pretty heavily. Anyways, this is a more darker fantasy. Each character kind of has different powers. They wear different insignia to represent that. Alina Starkov, she is our harbinger of sun and light, and she's trying to cast out this darkness, basically. The problem is the last book, and a lot of people will agree with me when it comes to this, kind of ends on a sour taste. There's this sort of romance building. It's like, gosh, what was her name? Jay and Kylo Ren. It's giving that because you don't really get the ending that it's building towards. It just like abruptly stops. I do not ship her with, what's her little friend's name? Is that a spoiler? I don't even know. I do recommend reading these. I think the books are written a lot better than the TV, and honestly, I think the TV show is what made me not like the ending because I think at least with the book, you feel more satisfied in the ending. You feel more happy for the character. So definitely read these before you watch the TV. There's just a lot that happens, but also not at the same time. Because it's all just based around this one big battle that eventually happens and then it ends. And it's not even this big battle against this whole kingdom. It's just one guy of like darkness. Am I wording that right? I don't know. I love the way the books feel. Anyways, I would recommend reading them. Not my favorite, but definitely give them a try before you watch the TV show. There's 7 of these and I don't feel like holding all of them. But the Shatter Me series, I remember I bought like the first 2 books and I read them within a few days, and then I immediately went to Barnes & Noble and bought the rest of the series, and then I finished it. This girl Juliet, her touch is going to make you not live anymore. She is kind of being sequestered to be used as a weapon, and she's not about that. She's trying to rebel. She wants to start her own rebellion, and then the person who kidnaps her kind of gives a Beauty and the Beast situation. She starts to fall for him and then gets mad at him, then learns more about him, and there's so much that goes on in these, and honestly I kind of need a refresher. I 1000% recommend it. I think this is a great starter to get into fantasy. There's not really spice to it, which you don't need because you just want to know how everything happens. You want to know what happens to her. Warner. That's the name. She's kind of like a Katniss Everdeen being used as like a weapon. You know how the Capitol used Katniss as like a symbol. Julia ends up being used as this weapon too, but then she fights back and she comes into her own, becomes super powerful, this symbol of everything. This pretty much hits every note you could possibly need in a book collection. You also kind of see her become more sure of herself. She's very unconfident. She, at the beginning, I mean, all these have this sort of situation where she's like, my touch is lethal, cross that out, my touch is power. And then it sort of builds on that throughout all these books, and she realizes she's not someone that needs to be feared and someone that should be respected. Honestly, I don't even know how much I've rambled about this, so let me just cut it off now because I could talk about this for way too long. Highly recommend. I love them. I need to reread them so I can refresh my brain on what happens. I'm gonna move my random book ends that are holding up nothing. My friend has one of the books in this because I let her read it, and so I don't have all of them to hold up, but there's too many anyways. Throne of Glass, Sarah J. Maas. Now I did read ACOTAR first, which I'll get to at some point, but let me talk about the best fantasy series I've ever read in my entire life and that I know will always be #1 for me. Throne of Glass. Celaena Sardothien. Yeah, it's a funny name. Ignore that. You start out with her as an assassin, and honestly, I can't say too much because there's a huge twist that happens later in the series, which I think is why I love this so much because no one was expecting it. So let me just start out from the first half. She's selected by the king to do some assassinating. There's a few romances that happen. You get to her end game later in the series when she steps into her own identity. This is just the best written fantasy I've ever read. I don't even know. You thought I was speechless when I was talking about Shatter Me. I don't even know how to explain my love for this. There's so much. There's honestly way too much to talk about, and there's so many spoilers. There's too much that happens without me giving away big spoilers, and I don't want to do that because I want you to read this and fall in love with Celaena. I do have to preface by saying this and The Assassin's Blade, which is the prequel. The Assassin's Blade is 5 short stories that give you a background on Celaena. You kind of see what she's gone through, why she is the way that she is, what she's fighting for essentially. And these first 2 books in the series, for a lot of people, for me and my friends, we agree are kind of slow to get through. They really build to it, and if you give up during these, you're missing out on such a beautifully written series. Because look at, okay, I don't have it. Kingdom of Ash is huge. Let me get to it, hold on. This is huge. So you have to build up to get to the final point, and you may be looking at this and thinking it's really daunting. I read this so fast. Everything that you've ever read is tied to in this book. Even things from The Assassin's Blade, from the little 5 short stories that you think are irrelevant, even things from that are mentioned in this end book. It is such a wholesome ending to this amazing epic. So if you want to be able to say, oh yeah, I read that 1,000 page end to a fantasy book like Kingdom of Ash, just give it a try. Once you get to Airfire or Queen of Shadows, I promise you will be obsessed with Celaena Sardothien and other characters whose names shall not be mentioned. Let me carry on before I forget what I was talking about. Now, you have to give credit where credit is due. A Court of Thorns and Roses, Sarah J. Maas, ACOTAR. As you can tell, A Court of Mist and Fury has seen some love. The spine's very broken in. This is on any social media. I see a recent Reese edit pretty much anytime I open TikTok from this book series. So if you want to be in the know and you haven't read this, I definitely recommend reading it. It is as popular as it is for a reason because it's amazing. It's fae, magic, a girl who's weak and powerless becomes strong and powerful, lots of romances, lots of spice. I'm not going to talk about it too long because I'm sure you've already read this if you're watching this video, and if not, everything's been spoiled to you on TikTok anyways. This is what got me interested in reading Throne of Glass, which came out first, I believe, the Throne of Glass, but this is what got me interested in that, and then Throne of Glass got me locked on everything else. Please read these, highly recommend regardless. It is a staple in anyone who is a fantasy reader. Yeah, you saw it coming. Crescent City, Sarah J. Maas. Oh boy. I do recommend reading lightly. As in, I'm not saying no. I'm not screaming at you like I was with Shatter Me and Throne of Glass, because these are kind of a lot to read. Not even like the size of it, but the first chunk is you're just thrusted into this world and there's not a lot of world building, so it can be a little confusing. Actually, a lot of confusing. There is a map, which I appreciate at times. This is one of the books, kind of like the Victoria one, where I tried reading this a few years ago and I got to page 100 and I gave up. And then a year later, I powered through and now I've read the rest of them. Definitely one that you need to be mentally prepared for. It's a very modern fantasy. ACOTAR is not modern, like there's no technology. This is technology meets everything else. There's some spice, a lot of romance, a big war battle that happens at the end of the book series. I can't talk about this too much because I'm not as passionate about this as I am with other book collections. So I will say give it a try if you think you can. If not, put it down and come back to it later. That's what I had to do to be able to read it. And then once I got there, I was very invested in the characters. Caraval by Stephanie Garber, and I will talk about her spin-off series too in just a second. You come to this island of carnival magic and there's this huge mystery you have to solve, a lot of dark things happening underground. You're in the perspective of a few different characters. I think they're sisters. There's a light romance in each book, but these are more heavy on the fantasy, not so much the romance. Honestly, one of the most magical, as in when I'm reading this, I really felt like I was part of the world and I really loved the world. I wish I lived in this carnival. It's funny because in the book there's so many dark things happening, but at the same time you look around and there's a cotton candy apple floating your way and it tastes amazing. Am I explaining that right? It's like you're in Disney World and you're walking on top of this huge dark mystery shadow thing happening. Metaphors are kind of hard sometimes. So if you see this, pick it up, read it. I highly recommend. How to restart. This covers every topic ever. If you name it, this has it. Maybe not so much thriller / horror. The magic is honestly what makes this so magical to read. So please give them a try. You're gonna fall in love with this series and the characters, and then you're gonna start the next one, Once Upon a Broken Heart. Let me grab it for you and tell you about that. Once Upon a Broken Heart, Stephanie Garber. This is the spinoff from Caraval. You would think this is heavy on the romance, but it's honestly not. It's such a slow burn and you don't really get to anything until the end of the trilogy, like the third book. This has more heavy magic. This is kind of like, instead of Fae, he's the Prince of Hearts that you're dealing with, and he's kind of this stubborn, broken-hearted, intense being that she softens up towards the end, of course. I think the second book, The Ballad of Never After, my opinion is it's the best in the whole collection because it touches so many different topics gently, and you honestly start out hating the Prince of Hearts a little bit, but then you end up being like, oh, he's just a little butterball that needs to be protected. I don't think, it's not necessary to read Caraval before this, but I think it does give a lot of backstory to what happens in these. I think it also goes without saying I highly recommend this. I don't even know which one's my favorite, honestly, because they're both so different. Caraval is more heavy on the magic, the mystery. I don't know what my cat's doing. Once Upon a Broken Heart is more heavy on the inner turmoil, battle, war, violence, slow burn, everything else. So everything that Caraval doesn't have high notes of, this does. So if you're looking for a little bit more of something that Caraval didn't have, this definitely has it. I think this was one of my favorite reads when I was reading it. I was very obsessed with the characters. I was constantly looking up fan art of everybody, of Mr. Prince of Hearts and Evangeline, and it satisfied my curiosity. Now let me not brag on these too much, because if you've seen my other videos, you know that I've talked about these obsessively. One Dark Window, Rachel Gillig, the duology, amazing. More on the dark side, more on the creepy kind of thriller side of the fantasy collective, not as heavy on the romance, but so much is happening that it doesn't matter. I'm not gonna brag on these too long because 1000% read these. These were not hard to understand, and I think these are still very underrated. That's probably why I talk about them so much, because I don't see that much hype on these when there should be. It's so beautifully written. I root for these characters, even if they're not the ideal picturesque persona of someone you should be rooting for. Let me just end it there because honestly I could talk about this for way too long, and I've already done that. You already know. If you haven't read this yet, end this video and go pick these up. Actually, no, finish this video and then go pick these up. That's all I'm gonna say. Heartless Hunter by Kristen Cicerelli. The second one in this Crimson Moth series is being released this month, I believe. I think I pre-ordered it. So this I loved. This is, you know how when you're reading a book and it's part of a collection or a series and you can just tell within the first book whether you're gonna love it or not be that invested? Loved it. I already know when the rest of this comes out, it's going to be one of my favorites. It's like a game, it says it on the back, so I'm basically just quoting this quote. It's a game of cat and mouse. A witch hunter and a witch ensue in this battle of magic and romance and heartbreak and betrayal, and you become so invested in both of these characters getting what they want, even though what they want means the other person isn't going to be too happy, essentially. Kristen wrote this so beautifully. There's a little bit of spice and steam. I would say it's probably more on the romanticy. I'm so excited for the next one to come out. I can't talk about this too long because not much has come out, but if you haven't, pick this up, get locked in, and meet me in a few weeks when the next one comes out. Anyways, the next one is Lightlark by Alex Astor, part of this little trilogy situation. It is, from what I understand, still being turned into a movie or something. I hope so, because I've talked about this one before, so I'm not gonna go too in depth, but I realize I didn't explain this as well as I could. It's more of a romantasy, I think, but Miss Girl, our main character, what's her name? I forgot. Isla. She's the queen of her island. She doesn't have powers, but she goes to this big battle to save her island, essentially. And she kind of has to fight her feelings for these two opposing characters. One is this epitome of light, golden, sunshine, rainbows, and the other is dark shadows, mystery, spookiness. She recognizes that she has feelings for both of them, and they both want different things, and they both are sort of villains of each other. It's kind of funny seeing how all this works out, and I really appreciate it once I get towards the end. Like Nightbane, whew, ate it up. I think some people say that it's not that creative to them. They felt like it was a rendition of Hunger Games or something. It's this deadly game that happens every 100 years, but it's nothing at all like that because she's the queen of an island already, and she goes to fight these other rulers to save their island, essentially, which is the opposite of what happens in the Hunger Games. So ignore those. Definitely give this a try. She steps into her own. She's kind of like Poppy from Blood and Ash, where they both start kind of not powerful, not very sure of themselves, not very confident, to this amazing being, essentially, and I'm very excited to watch it come out. I hope they do it justice, please. I think that was obvious in me saying yes, definitely read these. I think there's only one I've said not to read, if I'm being honest. Oh well. Powerless by Lauren Roberts. Reckless, I think there's a third one coming out at some point. I love this. I think it's not my favorite because there are some things that I found weren't very creative, weren't very different. Miss Payton, she's a thief, she has no power, she's not anything spectacular. And then Kai, he's a prince, he's magical, he's angry. She's hiding this big secret, and it's his job to find people with her secret and hunt them down and execute them. There's a lot of fighting, like inner turmoil going on, because they have feelings for each other even though they recognize the other person is essentially their enemy. And you get to that because she does stuff to make her an enemy, not only to Kai but to the kingdom, even though you'll see why it's not that bad. Like, that person had it coming. Very heavy on the fantasy. There's a lot of world building, but I thought it was written really simple, understood what was happening to a T. This does kind of remind me of the Red Queen series. There are a lot of similarities, and that one definitely came out first before this. I think this is different because the world building definitely different. There's like a hunted and a hunter situation, another cat and mouse, which I love the hunting ones, the books where the guy's hunting the girl or vice versa. Those, I don't care how many times they've been rewritten, I will gobble them up. So I think that's where these kind of differ. So I do definitely recommend these. And let me get to Red Queen real quick before I forget. This is the first fantasy book collection I ever read. Red Queen, Victoria. She's definitely seen some love, some wear and tear. The people with red blood and silver blood. If you have silver blood, you're powerful, you have magic. If you have red, you're ordinary, you're nothing. There's these princes who are brothers who are fighting for her love, essentially. There's a lot of betrayal. The world building is amazing, the magic is amazing. My memory isn't too fresh on this, and I don't want to spend forever reading these to try and remind myself what exactly happens. But I can say, if you are very new to the fantasy world, if you need something light, this is such a beautiful one to start with. This is, like I said, the first one I read, which is what influenced me to pick up more fantasy books. One thing I love about this, and with honestly pretty much all these, is even though our main character girls start out powerless, they know how to fight. They know how to hold a sword. So I'll just say I don't remember much, but I remember I love them. The romance may not be heavy, and that's kind of Victoria's thing. She's not a heavy, spicy romance person, but the magic in this world, the plot, the war that happens in the end, you don't care if there's kissing or no kissing. You just want to know who survives and who she ends up with. Do I want to take Fourth Wing off of here? Let me just say, I've talked about Fourth Wing so much these past few weeks because Onyx Storm was just released. So let me just simply say, yes, read it. I'm sure if you're seeing this, you've either already read it, or you know it's all over social media. It's a dragon school. There's a huge war happening. There's magic. Violet is the most powerful girl ever when it comes to her magic, but she's not super powerful when it comes to her physicality. Anyways, there's a lot of spice to that series. The world building I think is great. The magic is great. I love the dragons. And we'll end on that note. Yes, read it. I feel like talking about Fourth Wing again. I need a break. Our last ones. A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. It's a Hades Persephone love stories in a very modern world with technology. There's a lot of I hate you, but deep down there's so much passion and fire between them that when they eventually let it release, it's very satisfying. There's a huge war brewing among all the gods. There's more to this that was released. I know some came out in the perspective of Hades, but the first ones were written in Persephone's, and I don't like the ones where books that come out, it's a retelling of the story from just another person's perspective. I like it if it's like the next chapter is someone else's perspective, that's fine. But if it's a whole other book, honestly, I'm 50-50 on recommending these. I think half of me is yes, because I think these were very fun, different because it's like a sort of Greek god situation, whereas these were all mostly fae and whatnot. But my no, because it's kind of predictable. It's very predictable. You know what's gonna happen. You see it coming a mile away. But that's the thing with all these. Like, you know they're always gonna end up with the person they hate or they battle with the most. Yeah, read them, but if you had to pick between this or the other ones, literally read anything else and then work your way to this. I think with that being said, that's pretty much every fantasy book I've read, at least on this bookshelf. And honestly, that's all I feel like talking about because now I want to go read. I just started The Serpent and the Wings of Night last night, so I want to finish that so I can eventually talk about it. I think that's what I'm gonna go do now. Anyways, thank you guys so much for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed this. Tell me if your opinions differ. I want to know what your thought process is. And don't forget, tell me if I need to switch up this situation. I need to redecorate. I'm a little lazy. Anyways, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.